We can start. Welcome to everyone. My name is Enrico Zimuel, and I'm going to present you the new exciting feature of PHP 7.1. So a few notes about me. I'm a developer since 1996. I work at Zend as senior software engineer. Zend is a Rogueway company. I'm part of the core team of Zen Framework and Agility. I do regular speaking about PHP, web development, and security stuff. I did also research at the Amsterdam University a long time ago. And I'm the co-founder of the PHP user group of Torino, the city where I live and work remotely. Okay, before to start, I would like to know who is using already PHP 7.1. Okay, let's try 7.0. Okay, PHP 5. Okay, so you are in the right room. 4? 4, come out. You are not allowed to stay here. I'm joking. Okay, so PHP 7.1 was released last year, the 1st December. And actually yesterday, they released 7.1.5. So I don't know, it was intentional for my presentation, but it was a good timing. By numbers. So as usual, the .1 release after a measure is very important because they do stable stuff, bug fixing. In fact, they fixed more than 300 bugs. They added 12 new features, and actually this is the goal of my presentation, to present you the new feature of the language. They also introduced 13 new functions, 36 new global constant, 20 backward incompatible change, 2 deprecated feature, 16 changed function, and 7 other changes. So a lot of news in this release. That's why I started to think on a presentation about that, because it can be interesting for everyone. Okay, so let's focus on the new feature of this release. The first is nullable types. So this is quite interesting. So basically, they added the ability to specify a null in parameters and return values. You have to use the prefix, the name, with the question mark. And null can be passed as an argument or as return value. So often we use null, in a function when something goes wrong in a function, for instance. So you can return null. It's quite common pattern. So this is an example, just a function, hi, that accepts a parameter that is a string and return a string, or a null. And you can also specify the null as a parameter. The most interesting part is about the return type, because as you know, you can have a default parameter like equal to null before 7.1 as usual, but we didn't have the possibility to specify the null as alternative value. So that's why it's interesting. So basically here we are just returning the name, the dollar name with a string hello with the name, if you pass something that is not null. Otherwise, we just return null. So very toys example. You can, as I mentioned, pass null as a parameter. That is valid because we accept null, a string. Or if you don't pass nothing, you will get a fatal error. This is very important because this is not a default value. This means you have to pass null or a string. That's it. And also, the return, you have to pass a string or a null. If you pass something else, you will get an error. So it's more type strict. Not a catchable one. Fatal error. This is another example using object-oriented. So we have an interface with a function foo. You have to return an object that is fooable or null. You can extend this interface with another interface, and you can omit the null as a return value. And actually, here we are strict. We are reducing the interface in some way, because it's compliant to the fooable, because fooable say, okay, you have to return null or a fooable. So any interface with the same foo function that return a fooable is valid for the specification. But if you do on the other side, if you have an interface that require with a function foo that require a fooable as return value, and you try to extend the interface allowing also null as return, this is invalid. You cannot do that. It's quite clear, the motivation. You can do also an example talking about interface using parameter. So we have an interface fooable with a foo method that accepts an object, $f, that is a fooable. If you try to extend this interface, you can actually, because the interface say that you need a fooable object here, you can specify a null as a parameter. So you can add, actually, you can extend the interface accepting also the null value, and still this is valid. It's not valid if you try to reduce the set of parameter. So if you have an interface that accepts null and fooable, or fooable, and you try to extend the interface removing the null value, you will get an error. So it's not valid. So this is important to have in mind. If you have any question, you can stop me anytime. So. Not equal false is true. No equal false. It should be. But I'm not.
Like this. Yeah, my question was for the previous slide where you did the ternary operator with a nullable object. Now the previous slide. Yeah, it says if name return hello concatenate name.
Yes.
So if name is not null.
Yes. It returns hello name.
Okay.
Yeah, this is actually I should say $name equal null. Then I just put an example because as you know in PHP there is this auto conversion stuff. So $name like if $name means $name is not null, is not false or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
So actually this is a good notes. I have to be more strict here and put $name equal null. So thanks for reminding me. Okay, so next new feature, the void return type. So you can specify using void return type that means nothing. So this function is not returning nothing, basically. So why this can be useful? Because sometimes, in order to see if a function, because of course in PHP you can just, if you think you remove this syntax here and you just have this swap function that swap two variables, it's perfectly fine to have a return without nothing. You just say, okay, if for instance in this case left is equal to right, I can just return the function because I don't have to do nothing, right? So it's perfectly fine in PHP 5, 4, whatever. But if you have void here, it's more clear. Reading the the interface of the function, the specification of the function, that the function itself is not returning nothing, and also is checking that the function is not returned. Because in PHP, if you say return, you can say also return, I don't know, false, true, $A, whatever. If you specify void, is a way to force your code to stay more clear. Because if you say return, true, false, whatever, you will get a fatal error. So it's more important just for better practice. Okay. Another nice feature is the array deconstructing. So basically, you with PHP 7.1, you can assign like the list function. I'm sure you are familiar with the list function in PHP. Actually, who knows about the list function in PHP? Okay. So basically, it's a function that gives you the ability to take object from an array and putting in a variable. So for instance, we have an array here, $data, that contains one element that is itself an array of 3 elements, foo, bar, and buzz. Using PHP 7.1, you can use the square bracket and assign the first element of the array. So basically this means PHP go inside the first element, so this element here, and try to get the value of the first and the second, actually, because we are just specifying 2 variables here, $A, $B, with foo and bar. So we are not using the third elements of the array here. It's the same to write in PHP before 7.1 list $A, $B equal data, whatever. So it's the same. And you can do also, of course, for instance, in a for each, you have an array, you can iterate on the elements and getting specific variable, assign the variable of the elements. So it's quite nice. Why is it important? Because when we introduced it in PHP 5.4, the possibility to specify an array using the square bracket, this is the symmetry, the opposite. So it's more natural way to work with this syntax, actually, instead of use list. And also, they added the possibility in 7.1 to support the key in the list operator or the new square bracket syntax, new shorthand syntax. The same example here, we are using a list. You can basically get the value of an associative array here, an hash table, whatever you want to call it. You can specify that the first that element with the key A will be stored in the variable $A. B and C, the same idea. And you can do the same, as I said, using the short and syntax. So nothing so special here, but again, a more natural way to use the array, the short and array syntax. But you cannot, you are not allowed to mix list with the square brackets. So for instance, if you try to get, this is a more complex example. So basically we have an array with the 2 elements, which each element is an array itself with 2 integers, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you try to do list and mixing together the syntax of list using the square bracket is not allowed. The same if you try to do the opposite to get the main array and the list, the elements itself. So if you want to use list, you have to do explicitly for all the sub-components, basically, or use the more elegant new syntax. So it's not allowed to mix together the list operator with the shorthand. Question?
What if I want to skip one element? I mean, with list, I can do list an empty space, comma, variable, you know?
Yes, you can do the same here.
I mean, I want to, no, maybe it was the previous one, sorry. Okay, suppose I want to take bar and buzz, so not foo. With the new syntax, can I do something like so?
I think you can do null, bar, and buzz. Null, $A, $B.
Ah, okay, thank you.
But double check, because I'm not a PHP interpreter as human, you know, so. If you cannot, someone say no? Okay, someone can try?
Lots of nods, okay.
Oh, this is
All right, so
this is the other room. We have we have an issue on track 1. Okay, now it's good. Okay, so next feature, iterable. We added a new pseudo type that is iterable. So basically, it accepts array or traversable. So why it can be useful for people? Because you can manage, more flexible code. It can be used also, of course, in parameter and return types. This is an example. We have a function foo that accepts an iterable object, $iterable, and do nothing, return nothing. You can call this function passing an array, because iterable accept array, or are a traversable, that is a PHP interface that is implemented by many others objects, like many other classes, like array iterator. Or if you write your iterator itself as a class, you can consume it. So it's more, it's a way to manage the both scenario. Previously, before 7.1, you cannot have the same feature actually. So it's nice. It's a nice pseudo-type. It's not really, I say pseudo-type because it's not a type itself. It's a way to manage these two type that are array and traversable. Okay, other feature, class const visibility. This is very cool. So basically, in PHP 7.1, you can specify the type of constant in your classes. You can say, okay, I want a public constant, so everyone can read it, a protected constant, or a private constant. So if you are extending some classes, you can, with the protected, as usual, you can get access to the constant. Private, that means just the class itself can access. So this is good for internals constant to be more robust and expose hidden information or not if you want. By default, if you don't specify the type of the constant, you will get a public. So quite simple. And actually, this is also nice if you use reflection. Who knows reflection? Okay. So for people who don't know about reflection, basically it's a component of the language itself that can introspect the code, so the object, the classes, and give information about the type of object, the type of classes, the parameter, the function, the method itself. So here we have an example. So in the previous slide, I just put an empty class with some constant, and the name is const demo. Here we are getting an object of reflection class that itself a PHP class, getting the class const demo of the previous slide. So the object $obj contains information about the class const demo. So we can get the constant inside the class using the get reflection constants. And we can introspect the information. We can say, okay, for instance, var dump the $const will get you an object that is a reflection class constant. It's a new object introduced in PHP 7.1. And actually, is not documented yet, so there is a bug open. So if you want, or you can contribute to PHP internals, just writing the documentation for this class. So this is a nice example how to contribute to the internal of PHP without spending months just basically reading, trying to getting the information using reflection itself. So reflection can be useful if you sometime, I don't know if you when you're working and you go to the documentation of php.net and sometimes they wrote, this is not documented yet, we don't have information. So reflection can be useful, and especially reflection object export. So remember this, reflection object export is a static function. So you pass an object in this, and they basically give you the information like a var dump of all the classes containing all the property, all the function. So you can introspect the code itself to see, oh, this object contain this method. I don't know, it's not documented, so what can I do? Or jump into the PHP source code, but can be difficult, or just use this export to see what's going on. So I think it's nice. It's a nice feature. Anyway, you have a lot of function here. You can get the name of the constant, the value, and if the constant is public, private, or protected. So I just put this slide because I think it's interesting for debugging or even to understand what's going on in your code. Okay, another nice, exciting feature of PHP 7.1 is the multiple catch. So actually, I don't know for you, but for me this was very helpful because if you are, managing I'm one of the contributors of Zen Framework, so we do a lot of, exception, inheritance. We have to manage, a library. So sometimes when you have some code and you need to get more than one exception, but the code itself that manages the exception is the same, you have to copy and paste actually, or doing nice other tricks to get this exception flow working. So this is, as you know, copy and paste is the evil of software engineering. I remember some company that give from the terminal of this long time ago, the terminal of the developers, they removed the Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V from the internals of the operating system. Was an hack, very nice. Anyway, now in PHP 7.1, you can use the pipe and say, okay, look, I'm catching exception type 1 and exception type 2 here. So with one line, you get basically multiple, you can specify multiple exceptions. So I think this is very nice for, and I hope people will refactoring the code using this. Question? This is, of course, up to you. I mean, if the code here is the same, you expect that in some way the exception type, but usually the exception get the message, the code, so it's not, you don't have to go inside the exception. So this is just to catch the exception. So maybe you can have a specific class, a specific method that introspect the exception itself, not just here, Okay. Other exciting feature of PHP 7.1, the negative offset. This is quite nice and can be confusing, so please careful with this. So basically, you can specify negative index in an array. So here there is an example with a string of 6 characters, A, B, C, D, E, F. And we are getting, we want to get the -2 elements. So anyone wants to try to answer to the first question? Who is the var_dump of this? E, let's see. E, D. No, it's E. Why? Because if you move from the right to the left, it's not start with 0. It's -1 is F, -2 is E, -3 is D. So that's why it can be confusing. But if you think about it, -0, what means? Make no sense. So that's the only way. If you try to get an element -7, for instance, you will get a PHP notice offset with an empty string. This is more tricky, the last one. So we are using, actually, the negative offset is everywhere. So this is just an example using an array, but you can even use in the string function. So for instance, here we are using stripos, so getting the first occurrence of an element inside a string. So the string is this one, AABBCC. The character is B, starting from -3. So who wants to try to see? It's 3. Why? Because we are getting from -3, so we start here, and actually the first occurrence of B is B itself, but we are getting the position. So we start from 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So 3 is the correct. So it's nice, negative, but be careful because it can be tricky. So don't write too many, plus and positive, negative itself can be very tricky. But if you pay some attention, you can get nice stuff. For instance, one of the stuff that I hate in PHP was to getting the last element of a string. I used substring foo -1. So I don't know why string was allowed to have negative and not the other function. So it was quite confusing to me at the beginning. Now you can say, okay, look, I want the last element. -1 is more, natural. Let's put it this way. Okay, so before to jump to the next feature, so basically, as you can recognize, the PHP 7, starting with this new major release, even the internals of the language started to change to be more, compliant, more regular, more natural syntax. And this is very important because a lot of bugs, a lot of issue with PHP comes because the internals of PHP, like the function, the string, the array, whatever, was not so symmetric. The parameter, the order of parameter was confusing. So we tried to, remove this negative, side of the language actually. So to have more robust way to write code. Because if the internals is confusing, for sure people will confuse the usage and write code with the issue itself. So starting from a better, a common language, everyone can benefit from this. So, okay, this is very interesting. The async signal handling. So I don't know if you are using PHP for command line services. if you are running some process in PHP. So this is very useful, because basically if you are using a function like PCNTL async signal or signal dispatch or whatever. So basically the idea here is that if you have to manage a process in PHP, so imagine that you have a PHP script that runs forever as a process itself in the system. In order to get asynchronous, to manage asynchronous events, before PHP 7.1 you have to manage using, for instance, the signal dispatch manually in the loop, getting every time checking for the dispatch signal. Or if you want to do asynchronously, you can compile using the ticks equal 1. You can declare ticks equal 1. This is another way to get to manage the asynchronous process. Now we have a special function that is async signals that give you the possibility to really execute, manage the execution of a process using asynchronous. So this is a very simple example. So you have to pass through to the async signals, and basically you can do stuff like this. For instance, I'm writing here a signal that is sign up with a function. So every time your script get sig up events, it will execute this code actually. And we are just here killing the process to get the passing the SIGAP events. So we are just triggering the events. And this is perfectly fine in 7.1, so it's quite nice because you don't have to be crazy with the mentioned stuff like looping, dispatching, and whatever. So I think it's quite useful. Another exciting feature is the closure from callable. So this is very nice. So basically, you have a new function that is from callable using the closure class, and you can create a closure starting from a callable. So imagine you have a callable. Here we have a class, an example, with a private function. It's just a var dump, the input parameter. And you want to expose a callable of this function. You want to create a callable of this function. So you have a public that is expose function that return a callable starting from the private function. So basically, if you execute this code, you get a private function that is a callable of the real private function of the class. So if you are done prefunc here, you will get a closure. So this is not an object itself, it's a closure itself. So this is interesting, especially if you are a framework developer or a library developer. You can do nice stuff. And again, you can expose some functionality. You can bridge actually the execution of some functionality using a closure itself. So can be interesting. Any question on this? Okay. Another important feature for security in PHP 7.1 is the support of authenticated encryption in OpenSSL. So this is very important. Actually, the 7.1 support also the authenticated encryption with associated data. What is that? And why is important? Because when you encrypt something, using whatever you want to use, and you don't authenticate the encryption itself, you are exposing your data for tampering. So anyone can get the encrypted information, even if they cannot understand what's inside the information, but it can change some bit, it can move bytes around, can do whatever he wants. And you have not idea, if you try to decrypt it, if someone has tampered the data. So this is very important. So if imagine I don't know if you are managing sensitive information, if you need to encrypt something in your application. But if you're not doing authentication, please do that, because it's very, very important. You cannot have any evidence of tampering the data without authentication. So the idea is very simple. We encrypt something, and then we authenticate the encryption using some hash function. That's the general idea. So we can do manually, actually, it's perfectly fine, even without PHP 7.1. You can encrypt something and after apply some specific function for the authentication. I'm not going to show you how to do that without 7.1. If you're interested, you can go on my website, this zimuel.it. I wrote a lot of posts about this stuff. I did also a lot of presentations, so you can easily find a way if you're not using 7.1. But because you are here, I suppose you want to use 7.1. So this is a very nice feature, because give you the authenticated encryption in just one step. So you encrypt and authenticate in just one step instead of doing it manually. It supports two encryption modes, the GCM and CCM. The GCM is Galois counter mode, is a very well-known encryption modes in security. And the other is the CBC MAC. But my suggestion is to use the GCM if you don't have any specification on your encryption part, because it's 3 times faster than CCM. And if you are interested, I put this link. By the way, I will put the slide on my website. I will tweet it. Even phpDay will tweet it, so you will find the slide. And when you see something in blue on the slide, this is a link to the specific resource. And if you are very interested in these topics, I wrote an extensive blog post about authenticated encryption in PHP 7.1, so you can check it out. Anyway, let's see what's the difference between and before 7.1. So, as you know, OpenSSL is the most used library for encryption in PHP. By the way, I didn't mention that with PHP 7.1, they deprecated the mcrypt extension. So if you are using mcrypt, you have to move to OpenSSL, starting from 7.2, because we are not using anymore. So now you will have just a deprecated message. So this is important for the future. Anyway, OpenSSL provides you an encrypt function. So you have to pass some information like the data that you want to encrypt, the method, the password. There are some options and optional parameter. The first is options, and the last is IV. IV is a seed for the encryption, a salt. With 7.1, they added these 3 optional parameters. The first is passed by reference, is a tag. So basically, that means that this will be also the return of the function. Tag is the authenticated hash. So it's the part that gives you the authentication of the encryption. And there are other 2 optional parameters. I don't want to spend time on this. Again, if you are interested, you can check it out my article online, because it's quite long. And of course, we have also the decrypt function in OpenSSL. So with 7.1, they added the tag and the AAD. So of course, if you want to decrypt something that has been encrypted using authentication, you have to provide also the authentication hash, the result of the authentication. In this way, the function can match the authentication and say, okay, the authentication is okay, and this is the result of decryption, or the authentication failed because someone has tampered the data. Again, tag is the authentication hash. Here we have an example, encrypt. So we are using AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, is, as the name says, a quite popular standard for encryption. Everyone uses it. With 256 bit of key, using the GCM mode, encryption mode. So we are generating just some parameter here, the random salt, We are using the random bytes function of PHP itself. Because, as you know, in PHP 7.0 they had this random bytes function that can be used also for security, because the random function of PHP cannot be used for security reason, because it's the deterministic algorithm. So please don't use it. And we are just generating 1K of random data. So if we call the encryption, passing all the information, by the way, we are also specifying that we want raw data, so object data as results. As you can see here, we have a $tag. $tag is not defined before, because it's actually the output. So as you know, in PHP you can pass parameter by reference and get also the filled value from the tag. So the output here is actually the ciphertext and the tag. Why I'm sure someone say, oh, this is very bad practice to have this, references by parameters can be confusing for people. So why they didn't, rewrite the encrypt with a more natural way for backward compatibility? So was the main reason why they didn't have a different API. Anyway. Of course, you can do the decrypt, and actually, how you can get the error if the response of the decrypt is false. And now here I did the right way. I put false equal decrypt. That means something wrong happened inside, so you can introspect the OpenSSL error string to get information about what's was the error, the authentication error, or something else. So as you can see, it's quite simple. You have to use encrypt and decrypt, and you get authenticated encryption with just one step. So I strongly suggest to have a look at this, because it's very powerful. It's compliant with the majority of security best practice. So we have a solid solution in PHP to encrypt data as the other, languages or technologies. Okay, another feature that can be interesting if you are looking for HTTP 2, so the version 2 of the HTTP protocol, is the server push. So basically, they had it in curl, famous extension for HTTP management, starting from 7.46 version and up, this server push function. So in order to use it, you have to use the curl multi-set opt and passing this constant push function. So basically, you are here we want to implement the server push of HTTP2 using curl. So we are expecting that curl as a client, you can define a callback that has been executed when you call some HTTP2 server. So that's the scenario. It's from the client side of curl, not the server side. So the scenario is you have a web server that is HTTP2. You have a PHP script that consumes curl in order to manage the notification of the server to your script. And you are just defining the callback inside your script. So that's the scenario. Give you an example. We are defining a callback that should be executed when the server push you the data. So that's the idea. We have some parameter here in the function. For instance, we have the parent curl handle, so the request the client made. We have a new pushed curl. It is a new handle for the pushed request. And we are actually the array of the headers of the request. So you can have this information here. We are just getting a counter here, transfer, also to count on the number of transfer. And actually in the callback you can return push OK or push deny. OK means the server everything was okay, so we managed the callback, or deny if you want to deny the push from the server. And there are other specifications here. I don't want to give you all the details because we don't have time. Anyway, the most important one is this one. So cur push function, and you pass the callback that you want to call it. You can see the details of the source code on internet. Okay, so we're almost done. Briefly, they added the new hash function in PHP 7.1. So this is also important for security. This function hash hkdf is a function that provides you the ability to start from a key and create a robust key for encryption and authentication. Because if you have, for instance, if you're using a user password, you know that you cannot use the user password because it's not so random, it's short, whatever, as encryption key. So the scenario is to start from the user password, if you need to encrypt something specific for the user, generate from this user password a more robust, more random key for to use in encryption. So never use the user password as the main key for encryption, because user passwords are not random, are not so robust. And this is actually a function. We have also in PHP the pbkdf2 other function that give this possibility to generate solid password, solid encryption key from a user password. This is another way to do that. Very briefly, you have to you have specified the hash function that you want, the key, the size of the output. You can specify the size of the bytes that you want, and the salt. Salt is important because it's a random string, and that you have to use in order to improve the security of the algorithm. So at the end, you have so if key is a user password here, example, you will get an encryption key and an authentication key, and you can consume this key for the encryption algorithm. Also, they added the support to SSH3. This is a new standard for hashing. So it's becoming very, very popular. It's a standard, so if you use it, no one can fire you because you used it. So standard means good. And actually, it's fast. I cannot say that it's more secure of SSH2 because we don't have any real evidence in real use cases, even in scientific paper. Almost the same, but it's a new standard, so we support it, so people can start to use it. And the usage is very simple. You have just to use the hash, the normal function. You can specify a specific name. This is an example for using a SHA-3 with 224 bits of output. So nothing special. So to summarize, I presented you just some of the new features of PHP 7.1. There are more. If you're interested, you can go to the php.net website and see all this new feature. But just as a reminder, we can use nullable or void type returns. We can use array destructuring. We have iterable. We can have specific visibility for constant, very important. We have multiple catch. We can do better process script using asynchronous signal handling. We can create closure from callable. We can encrypt information using authentication encryption. We can start to use HTTP2 with cur, new hash function, a lot of stuff. So I hope you enjoyed these talks. Please rate the talk to this on joined in. If you want to send me an email, this is my new email address, enrico.zimuel@rogwave.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter. So thank you very much for your attention.